we've been talking about tax increment financing a number of times in council meetings over the last month or so, and I know a lot of the council members have a fairly good understanding of what tax increment financing is, but what's happened is a lot of the public doesn't seem to understand what tax increment financing is, and I've had a lot of elected officials ask me if we would try to stand up and help the public understand what tax increment financing is. Thomas Kittredge is here as our Economic Development Director, and I want to invite him and Wayne Marshall, our City Planner, if I misspeak at any point in time during this explanation, to fix that change, or fix that misspeaking situation. First of all, tax increment financing is a financing vehicle to get something done. That's what it is. It's a special mechanism. It requires state approval. It's not something you can just do on your own. It's usually for something identified for a project. People think that the first thing you do if you're going to have a tax increment financing situation is you have to identify a tax increment financing district. I'm going to pull up the map for a second and show you the downtown tax increment financing district. This is the downtown tax increment financing district, and this whole area is surrounded by red. It was set up by the city back in 2005, 2006, and it had a variety of purposes. And but that was the first thing they did, is where's the area that we're going to use. And the reason we have an area, we want to know what the defined area is because when you figure out what the defined area is, you ask yourself, once we see that area, take a snapshot, what is the total value of all the taxable property in that area? Personal property, real property, whatever. What's the total value? And tax increment financing doesn't change the fact that these properties all continue to pay taxes like everyone else. It only measures the new value beyond the snapshot. So in 2006, when this district was set up, a snapshot was taken of the whole value of that district. And only the growth in value, the new value since 2006, is affected by tax increment financing. The rest of these properties all pay taxes just like they normally do, but a portion of their taxes on their new growth is what goes into the increment financing district. I've done a small model here just to show you that if in 2006, if the whole value of the whole downtown area, and I'm just using this as an example, was $5 million, well, that $5 million value is still there in 2012. And that $5 million of value pays taxes just like every other property in Belfast does. But between 2006 and 2012, there's been some growth in this defined area of the downtown district. And here I use, just as a simple example, about $2 million of growth. It's more than that, but I'm using that as an example. It is only this additional growth that is used to fund the TIF. Now, why do we have TIFs? Again, maybe because we want to get some kind of development or economic opportunity happen, and we might want to use the future growth of the district to help pay for it. We did just that in Northport Avenue, where Matthews Brothers wanted to expand. They needed to get sewer lines down there. The city created a Northport Avenue TIF, and it has specific purposes, and it said right in it in the plan, when the new growth comes down in Northport Avenue, we're going to dedicate that to help pay off the loan for the sewer line, and that's exactly what we do. So we were able to create that district in, I think, 2005, 2006 as well. We built the sewer line. Matthews Brothers expanded. The jobs were there. The benefit was there then. And the extra value that was added by Matthews Brothers and other properties in that district is paying off that loan. And that's how tax increment financing basically works. But it's not a forgiveness of debt. Nobody gets a lower tax rate in one part of the city than the others do. It's just this little piece of growth that you earmark for a specific thing. Is that a fairly reasonable explanation? Yes.
I may have missed it, but did you make the point that the benefit of this is that we are not losing any state funds. You know, normally we would have to have that included in our formula for how much a state.
That's a very good point. One of the benefits, and this is why it's regulated by the state, because the state's careful about how much it regulates what benefits it's going to let us have. But one of the benefits of tax increment financing is this additional value, this piece up here, the new value once the district is created, is not counted in the city's total citywide valuation. Every year, things grow, things get added on, garages get built, decks get added, valuations go up. But this growth in this district does not get added to the total number. Why is that important? Because the state uses our total valuation to decide how much subsidy it will put into our school system. Roughly for about $2 million in a tax increment financing area, we actually get about an additional $20,000 to pay for our schools that would otherwise be paid by our taxpayers. So we actually get a benefit by having this amount of money not included in our gross amount of value citywide. Even when they look at the county tax bill, they figure out what the county tax bill, and they look at the total valuation of every town in Waldo County, including Belfast. They do not include this piece in that, so we save a little money there. The recognition by the state is that these are for redevelopment, economic development, and growth projects, and again, they're pretty well regulated. That's why we just can't do them willy-nilly. And they're always usually dedicated for specific purposes. The one that's in the downtown district today, there's a variety of things that were considered, but the city knew it was going to need infrastructure enhancements, sidewalks. It wanted to build a coastal walkway, and we're getting ready to do that. These were visions they had, and they wanted to create a financing mechanism that didn't just add the cost of that new project onto the existing tax base. What it did is it added the cost of those new projects onto the future growth. And as we've seen, the Front Street Shipyard came in, that's future growth. That wasn't there in 2006. And so literally, the extra money they're paying will help pay for the walkway. And that's how it works. Mike?
I would really like to, you know, I realize we're sitting here, I've been listening to TIF talk for 13, 14 years or something. And I understand it. It took me a long time, I have to say. It's a confusing thing. There's an old saying about it, about lots of things like this, but if you're not confused, you obviously don't know what's going on. It's a confusing subject, and I think one time being explained by Joe isn't going to be sufficient. And I would, I mean, there's very few people that are, the real benefit of this presentation is going to be when it plays 5 times. So I would really like to hear, you know, Wayne and Thomas both speak to it as well for just a couple of minutes. And I just want to say one other thing about TIFs. It's really worth looking up tax increment financing, and it's used very differently in different places. Like in Augusta is a great example where all that new shopping district up there by the interstate is, they TIF'd that area, and it was a great benefit to those shopping districts. So that increased value went for all the interchanges, and I don't know what else they did there, but the infrastructure was paid for in a way by that development. So we're not doing that in this case. We're building a walkway. We're talking about doing Front Street. We're doing sidewalks and those kind of things. But there's very different approaches to how you use TIFs. So
I just want to add to that, one of the more interesting ones I've seen is in Sanford, where the downtown core of Sanford is about 12, 13 miles off of 95. They wanted to build a big retail mall out closer to 95. They took that added value that grew out there, and all that money goes into the downtown, right. the original downtown, to keep that economic hub going as well. So one doesn't necessarily have an uncompetitive, they keep an 11 playing field. It's just interesting.
And before you bring up
Sure.
the other thing, I just really want to compliment the council back then in '06. I don't know what we were thinking about. I know it seemed like a good idea at the time. I was the mayor. But I want to also compliment Wayne, who brought it forward. Just think of the climate that we were dealing with only a few weeks ago with this, sort of mass anger. To try and do something as far-thinking as this in that kind of climate would have been very difficult. So I think, creating tools for the future is a critical thing that councils do. Sometimes doesn't pay off on your watch, but boy, 6 years later, it sure paid off, so.
You guys have anything like that?
I'll mention a couple of things. Joe did a very good job explaining that.
State your name.
Oh, sorry. Thomas Kittredge, Economic Development Director, City of Belfast. The key thing with tax increment financing, it's one of the few municipal economic development tools that's available in the state of Maine. Like any tool, it can be used appropriately and inappropriately. If you're thoughtful about the district, Joe, I'm not sure if Joe mentioned, the revenue that's generated from a district has to be used in that same district. So you have to be very careful about how you set up the district to be able to maximize the benefits. And to develop a development plan that really are going to be things that further enhance the economy. The development plan for the downtown waterfront TIF has a number of things, including the Harbor Walk, and like at a previous meeting, we talked about maybe amending that development plan to incorporate some new things we're learning from the downtown waterfront master plan. Joe mentioned a downtown TIF, such as ours, specially designated, has a couple other features, one of them being other TIF districts can divert revenue to the downtown TIF. And that's something we could do with the Northport Avenue TIF. Revenue could be generated in there and diverted to the downtown if we so choose. But it's one of the few things we have that can really help stimulate economic development if it's used appropriately. So.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep, no problem.
I'll be short. I'll flip the map over just for a moment. Belfast's first experience with the TIF came with the Matthew Brothers TIF. It was really to accomplish a dedicated purpose, as Manager Slocum mentioned. Matthew Brothers approached us, they wanted to do an expansion. They were on a septic system. They needed public sewer. Putting public sewer in was expensive. What we were able to do by establishing a tax increment financing district is to take the increased valuation that Matthew Brothers did by building new buildings, bringing on more employees, and taking those revenues and dedicating them to the cost of what it was to do the sewer expansion. And basically, over a 20-year period of time, there'll be enough revenue generated within this TIF district to pay for that bonded cost for the sewer expansion. So it didn't have an impact upon the taxpayer with doing the sewer expansion, and had a great benefit of enabling Matthew Brothers to do the expansion that they proposed and remain in Belfast. That was the first one which Belfast addressed. The second one came about was the downtown waterfront TIF. And it's one of those things that you talk about where, boy, back in 2005 when we talked about this, it was with the Belfast Bridge LLC project was going to take off along the waterfront. And the Belfast Bridge LLC project was going to generate $12 million in new tax revenue. And that tax revenue is what we looked at as saying being able to provide it into a tax increment financing district would enable those new revenues to be dedicated to public improvements that would benefit all of the downtown. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately with where we are today, Belfast Bridge fell apart. They fell apart quite rapidly, so that the TIF district for 5-6 years was generating $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year. Not much, and it was because of the little things that people did. People were adding a small expansion onto an existing building downtown, but there wasn't anything big. Now, with the arrival of the Front Street Shipyard, with the amount they've invested into the waterfront, we're now starting to see real revenue coming to that TIF. As was mentioned in one of the recent council meetings, it's about $100,000 at the present time. When building number 1 comes on, it'll probably increase to about $115,000 plus minus $1,000. That then is more development may happen in the downtown, more revenues will be able to continue to come in. And again, we can apply those funds to making improvements within the receiving area. And that's why it's really important sometimes to look at your boundaries, because the areas where the revenues are generated are the areas where you're also going to be making the improvements. And that's why at a recent meeting, Thomas and I spoke with you about perhaps looking at doing some minor expansions of this boundary. But TIF, I'd agree with Thomas and Joe, this is a tool which can be used at the local level to try and help direct and implement public policy, what it is you would like to accomplish. It is one that requires the review of the state. The one thing about a downtown TIF, it is exempted from the state maximum amount of area that can be included in a TIF, which is 5% of the land area within your municipal boundaries. I think it's 5. And so we can't just make all Belfast a TIF. You've got to, as a targeted program to try and accomplish specific public purposes. And right now, as noted, I think we're starting to see some of the benefits of what was created. Well, you saw the benefit from Matthew Brothers on day one. You know, it was direct. It happened right off the bat. This one was a little slower in coming, but now that it's here, it seems to be starting to help out quite a bit.
Thank you, Wayne.
So can you just follow up, you know, as a good example of, we're going to be funding the Harbor Walk, and so this tax increment, this increased taxes has been sequestered,
The city will be using a portion, not all, based upon the council decision to go with a 20-year bond, you'll be using a portion of the annual revenues coming in the tax increment financing district to help retire that 20-year bond on an annual basis. There are still additional funds that will be coming into that TIF above and beyond what the bond payments are, and depending upon, you know, what else may happen in town, there may be additional revenues there. But it is one that is noted. It meant that you did not have to consider having to appropriate specific municipal revenues, new taxation, to make that happen. And as well as the Manager Slocum noted, what it did, it had the added benefit of shielding those revenues from the state school funding formula, which is a big thing. And that's why people consider tax increment financing districts, one of the key reasons, and why the state is so careful, where they look at things and saying, is this a legitimate state purpose that they want to advance? Because the state doesn't want to give up revenues. The state only wants to give up revenues if they feel that something positive is going to happen.
Marina?
I heard Thomas speak about the fact that you could, if you decided to do so, use revenue generated from one TIF into projects in another TIF area. And one of the things that I noticed was that the Coastal Farms facility is within the Northport Avenue TIF, and to the best of my knowledge, there aren't really any projects planned for that TIF. And so my assumption is that we could use that TIF money for a project in the downtown area if we so chose.
Jenny, you can have, the downtown district can receive revenues from other TIF districts. Thomas and I spoke with you at a recent council meeting about that possibility of using revenues from the Northport Avenue TIF to perhaps to be directed toward the downtown TIF. Because with the improvements that Coastal Farm has already made, and they're looking at another potential improvement at the Coastal Farm site, there likely will be more revenues in the Northport Avenue TIF that are needed to pay the bonded indebtedness on the only capital improvement for which that district was established. We didn't have 10 things we were trying to accomplish in the Northport Avenue district. Unlike the downtown district, we can't stop at 10. There's any number of things you could consider. So the idea is that where potentially you could take revenues from this district and apply them, excess revenues, and apply them to the downtown district. That's an opportunity for the council to consider along the way.
What's the total valuation of the city of Belfast?
$700 million.
So 700 million. This increase by, we're estimating Front Street Shipyard at?
Right now, it came in this year at a little over 5. Next year, it'll be a little over 7, based upon Bob's initial numbers, because he's looking, he hasn't fully done the assessment yet of the building number 1. Should you do, Thomas and I made a proposal, you can think about looking at personal property as well, which could have some impact, but we'll say plus and minus, it's about $7.5 million at the shipyard.
And coastal farms?
Coastal Farms, I do not have a number as of yet, because all that improvement occurred post-April 1st. And so Bob Whiteley, the assessor, has not been to Coastal Farms to make that determination yet. The only thing we've talked with Bob is how he would consider improvements. And when you look at the freezer unit, for example, he considers that to be real property, not personal property, which does mean it would be subject to the current formula for determining what's TIF dollars.
So, I've had people say, well, why bother doing a TIF? Why not just leave it in the tax base, and then it'll lower the taxes for everybody else? And what I'd let you answer that. I've got an answer for them, but
I think
you already said it, but why not answer that question?
I'll tell you one answer. The council's decided to finance the Harbor Walk off the downtown TIF. What that means is the taxpayers outside that district, taxpayers on the east side, taxpayers on Edgecombe Avenue, taxpayers on Northport Avenue, their tax dollars are not going to pay for that coastal walkway, Harbor Walk. It's going to be paid for by the people who have raised the value of their property, and one of the largest ones, obviously, is the Front Street Shipyard. So in that regard, it's the people within that district who are, or those property owners who are financing the improvement in that district. You're not asking the greater outlying people outside the district to finance that district. That's a big reason.
Secondly, it was discussed is that you are shielding those same individuals from what is an increase in what the state, actually a decreased amount of state revenues coming in for school subsidy, which means that you're having a positive impact on their tax rate because we shield this amount of revenue from that state valuation.
Right, so what will we collect on taxes? Just $7.5 million? If that was, just anywhere.
140,000.
How much?
140,000 maybe?
2 times roughly, under 2, yeah. Yeah, so, but out of that 140,000, almost 2/3 of it would go right to the school.
Yeah.
If I can have, just to follow up on that, sorry for a revolving door of people talking. It's no point of setting up a tax increment financing district if you don't have a viable project in mind. There's no point of setting up a district and diverting funds to it if you don't have a project to spend it on. Then you are kind of losing out by all that money being sequestered, not being able to spend it in the general fund. If you have viable projects that you see a big need for, this is the best way to pay for certain projects. So again, it goes back to what do you want to set the district for? What's the goal of it? So that you can divert the funds to spend on those projects. And the big advantage, again, is the sheltering from the state education formula.
Yeah.